The $50 bill was supposed to help them survive the week. Instead, it bought them a meeting with a man whose associates die in convenient accidents, and whose enemies recant testimonies before trials even start. Brielle Miller thought giving cab fare to a confused elderly woman was just kindness. She didn't know surveillance cameras had tracked her daughter through 8 city blocks, that her bank account would mysteriously gain $20 she never earned, or that the businessman who summoned her to his penthouse kept a wall of monitors showing security feeds she'd never consented to. The old woman they saved was Vivian Stone, mother of the ghost of the East Side, and now they had 48 hours to decide. Accept protection from a man the feds can't touch, or try to disappear from someone who found them in 6 hours. November in the city had a specific kind of cruelty. The cold seemed personal, and tonight, the rain came down in sheets thick as curtains, making the struggle of the honest look pathetic. I pushed through the service entrance of the Grandview Towers at exactly 10:47 p.m., my back screaming from double shifts that had become routine rather than emergency. 6 hours here after 8 hours across town. My body kept a detailed inventory of every bent knee, every chemical burn on my forearms, every moment pressed against tile that smelled like industrial disinfectant and other people's carelessness. Piper sat in the lobby's side alcove, the one near the artificial ficus that management replaced quarterly to maintain the illusion of life. Her library books were spread across her lap, already finished, I knew, probably hours ago. She looked up when my footsteps squeaked across the marble, and I saw it immediately in her face. That expression children develop when they're trying not to burden you with the truth that waiting in lobbies at midnight isn't normal, that other kids their age are in warm beds with parents who work 1 job, not 2. She was 10, but her eyes carried the accumulated weight of every budgeting conversation she'd overheard, every "we can't afford that" I'd tried to soften. "Ready?" I asked, keeping my voice light despite the exhaustion pulling at every syllable. She gathered her books without a word, tucking them into a canvas bag that was fraying at the handles. I kept meaning to buy her a new one. That mental list of small necessities I'd purchase, when we had extra money, was becoming a novel. We stepped outside and the rain attacked us like it had been waiting. I'd left my jacket in the break room of the first building I'd cleaned, 9 hours, and what felt like several lifetimes ago. Piper pressed against my side as we started toward the bus stop 4 blocks east, past the closed boutiques and restaurants where people paid for single meals, what we spent on groceries for a week. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. The streets were abandoned at this hour, just the occasional taxi sending spray onto the sidewalk, and a few silhouettes moving between the amber glow of late-night establishments. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman stood beneath the awning of a shuttered jewelry store, her silver hair matted to her skull despite the minimal shelter. She wore a wool coat that might have been expensive once, now soaked through and hanging heavy on her slight frame. She clutched a leather purse against her chest with both hands, protective, like it contained something irreplaceable. Her eyes moved across the street with an unfocused confusion I recognized instantly. My mother had looked like that in her final months. That specific disorientation, like someone had rearranged the world while she'd turned away, and now nothing made sense anymore. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. The woman stepped toward the curb as a taxi approached, raising one trembling hand. The cab didn't even slow down, tires hissing through puddles as it passed. She tried again with the next one, and the next. But they drove past her like she was a ghost, like she'd already stopped existing. Maybe it was the neighborhood. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe taxi drivers in this city developed an instinct about fares, and whatever they sensed here made them keep their doors locked and their eyes forward. "Mom," Piper said quietly, her voice cutting through the rain's static. "I know, baby." We should have kept walking. We had exactly $53 in my checking account until Friday's direct deposit, 4 days away, and that money was already assigned. $28 for groceries if I stretched them hard enough. $17 for the electric bill that was now 2 weeks overdue. $8 for the bus passes we needed to get through the week. Everything calculated down to the dollar because when there's no cushion, there's no room for spontaneous kindness. This choice would define the rest of his life. But Piper was already moving toward the woman, and I was already following because we'd both been cold before, we'd both been ignored before, and we both remembered exactly what that felt like. "Excuse me," I said, approaching slowly. Disoriented elderly people could be unpredictable, sometimes frightened. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman turned, and her eyes were a deep brown that held warmth despite everything. She spoke rapidly in what sounded like Italian, gesturing at the empty street, and then pulling a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket with shaking fingers. The paper was soaked, ink bleeding at the edges, but I could make out an address written in elegant cursive. Riverside Heights. One of those buildings where a single month's rent equaled 6 months of mine. "I don't speak Italian," I said gently, "but I can see you need to get home. These drivers won't stop for you." She shook her head, frustrated with the language barrier, and tried again in heavily accented English. "Taxi. I need taxi home. My son. He will worry for me." "Okay," I said, glancing at Piper. "We'll get you a taxi. We'll make sure the driver knows exactly where to take you." But this wasn't even the most shocking part. The next 12 minutes were an exercise in urban invisibility. 6 cabs passed us. 6. I stepped into the street, waving both arms, using every technique I'd learned from years of trying to get rides in rain and snow and neighborhoods where drivers calculated risk in milliseconds. Nothing worked. The woman was shivering violently now, her confusion deepening as hypothermia and fear compounded. Her lips were losing color. "This is ridiculous," Piper said, her voice sharp with a 10-year-old's sense of justice. And before I could grab her, she'd stepped directly into the path of an approaching taxi, forcing it to brake hard, the driver's horn blaring through the rain. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. My heart stopped completely. Time suspended. Then I saw Piper was safe, standing with her small hand already on the cab's rear door handle. "We need this cab," she called back, already pulling the door open. "Ma'am, please get in before he changes his mind." I helped the woman into the back seat, her movements slow and unsteady. Piper leaned through the open door, speaking directly to the driver through the partition with an authority I didn't know she possessed. "She needs to go to this address. It's on Riverside Heights. She's confused and she's been out here too long, so you need to make sure she gets inside the building safely. Don't just leave her at the curb. Take her all the way inside and make sure someone's there, okay?" The driver, a man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd worked nights for decades, looked at the address, then at the woman, then at my daughter. "That's a $50 fare from here," he said. I didn't have $50. That moment, everything in the room changed. I didn't have $50. The silence that followed the driver's statement felt like it had physical weight. I could feel Piper's eyes on me, waiting. And the elderly woman in the back seat had stopped shivering just long enough to look confused about why we were all standing in the rain, not moving. "Mom," Piper said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Not pleading. Something more definitive than that. "Piper, we can't," I started, but she was already digging into her jacket pocket. She pulled out a bill I recognized immediately. A $50 note, crisp and seemingly out of place in her small hand. My grandmother had given it to her 6 months ago, pressed into her palm with strict instructions. "This is for something important, sweet girl. You'll know when." "Piper, no," I said, reaching for her arm, but she'd already turned back to the driver. "Here," she said, pushing the bill through the partition slot. $50. Take her home safely. Please." The driver looked at the money, then at my daughter's face. rain streaming down her cheeks, her expression set with a determination that made her look older than 10. He took the bill. "All the way inside," Piper repeated. "Make sure someone's there." "Yeah," the driver said, something softening in his tired eyes. "Yeah, kid. I'll make sure she gets home safe." But there was one detail everyone missed. The elderly woman reached forward suddenly, grasping Piper's hand before she could step back. She said something in rapid Italian, emotional, then fumbled with the clasp of a thin gold chain around her neck. Before I could process what was happening, she'd pressed something into Piper's palm. A small locket, delicate and clearly old, with tiny flowers engraved on its surface. "No, you don't have to," I started. But the woman was already speaking over me in fragmented English. "For you, for the angel child. You keep, you remember, kindness is everything." Her eyes were wet, and I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. Everything. The driver shifted into gear, clearly ready to leave before we all drowned. The woman settled back into her seat, clutching her purse again, but she kept her eyes on Piper through the window until the cab pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the rain-soaked night. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. Piper stood there, the locket in her open palm, water pooling around it. "Piper," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "That money was—" "I know what it was," she said quietly, closing her fingers around the locket. "Grandma said it was for something important. That lady needed help, Mom. Nobody else was stopping." I wanted to explain to her about the electric bill, about the groceries we couldn't buy now, about the 3 miles we'd have to walk home because we couldn't afford the bus. I wanted to tell her that kindness was a luxury we couldn't afford, that the world didn't reward people like us for being good, that she'd just traded our safety net for a stranger who'd probably forget about us by morning. But when I looked at her face, rain-soaked and resolute, holding that locket like it was a medal of honor, I couldn't make myself say any of it. "Come on," I said instead, putting my arm around her shoulders. "We should start walking." The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse, coming down in sheets that turned the streetlights into blurred halos of yellow and white. My shoes were soaked through within the first block, and I could feel water seeping through the cheap canvas, making my socks squelch with every step. Piper didn't complain. She never did. She just tucked herself against my side and matched my pace, block after block through neighborhoods that got progressively less safe as we moved away from the affluent areas near the towers. By the second mile, my feet had gone numb. My uniform was plastered to my skin, and I'd started shivering so hard my teeth chattered. Piper's lips had taken on a bluish tint that made panic spike in my chest. But when I suggested we stop and find shelter, she shook her head. "We're almost halfway," she said, her voice small but steady. "We can make it." He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for family. The 3rd mile was the worst. We passed a late-night diner, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon hit me like a physical blow. My stomach cramped painfully, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since the granola bar I'd split with Piper at 4 p.m., 9 hours ago. We had no money for food, not even for a single cup of coffee to warm up. I thought about the $50, about where it could have gone, the electric bill, groceries that would have lasted us through next week, the school supplies Piper needed, the cavity I knew she had but couldn't afford to get filled yet. But I also thought about that elderly woman's face, the way she'd looked at Piper like she'd seen something holy, the way she'd pressed that locket into my daughter's hand with shaking fingers and called her an angel. Pride and terror warred in my chest, neither one winning. We reached our apartment building at 1:23 a.m. The elevator was broken. Again. So we climbed 4 flights of stairs on legs that barely functioned. I unlocked our door with fingers so cold I could hardly feel the keys. Inside, our apartment was dark and cold. The heat had been set to the minimum to save money, and I didn't dare adjust it now. I helped Piper out of her soaked clothes and into dry pajamas, then wrapped her in every blanket we owned. "Take a hot shower," I told her. "As long as you need. Warm up." While she was in the bathroom, I sat at our tiny kitchen table and stared at the calculator on my phone. $50. Gone. The numbers didn't work anymore. They just didn't work. I'd have to pick up an extra shift, maybe 2. Maybe I could ask Mrs. Chen if she needed someone for overnight work. Maybe I could sell something, though we didn't own anything worth selling. Piper emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of steam, her hair wet but her color better. She climbed onto the chair across from me, still wrapped in her blanket cocoon. "Mom?" she said quietly. "Yeah, baby." "Did I do the wrong thing?" Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. I looked at her face, at the worry creasing her forehead, and I realized she'd been carrying this question for the last 3 miles, wondering if her act of kindness had been a mistake, wondering if being good had been wrong. "No," I said, and I meant it even though it complicated everything. "No, you did exactly the right thing. That lady needed help, and you helped her. That's never wrong." "But the money—" "We'll figure out the money," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We always do. What you did tonight, that took courage. That took heart. And I'm proud of you, Piper. So proud." She nodded, but I could see she didn't quite believe me. How could she, when she'd seen my face in the rain, seen the calculations I'd been running in my head? This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. Later, after I'd tucked her into bed and she'd fallen asleep with the locket clutched in her fist, I stood in our dark kitchen and let myself feel it all. The pride that made my chest ache. The terror of being $50 shorter with bills that wouldn't wait. The strange, unsettling certainty that something had shifted tonight, that we'd stepped onto a path I couldn't see the end of. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The city settled into its pre-dawn quiet. That brief window where everything paused before starting again. And somewhere across town, in a building where people paid more for parking spaces than I paid in rent, an elderly woman was safe and warm. It had to be enough. It had to be. But what he discovered next changed everything. Thursday arrived with the kind of exhausted inevitability that comes from 3 consecutive nights of emergency overtime. I'd picked up 2 extra shifts, begged Mrs. Chen for a weekend cleaning job, and sold my winter coat to a secondhand shop for $30. We were still $12 short on the electric bill, and I'd been rationing our groceries so carefully that Piper's school lunches had become embarrassingly small. But we hadn't been disconnected yet. That counted as a win. I was on my knees in the executive washroom of the Grandview Tower's 18th floor, scrubbing grout with a toothbrush because the service manager had written me up last week for insufficient attention to detail. The ammonia smell was burning my sinuses, and my lower back had progressed from aching to actively spasming. The door opened behind me. That moment, everything in the room changed. "Excuse me," a deep voice said. "Are you Brielle Miller?" I turned, still on my knees, and looked up at 2 men in dark suits. Not security guard uniforms. Actual tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Both were tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that suggested they knew exactly how to handle themselves in situations that required handling. "Yes?" I said, getting slowly to my feet. My wet rubber gloves dripping pink cleaning solution onto the tile. "Can I help you?" "You need to come with us," the first one said. He was older, maybe 50, with silver at his temples and eyes that evaluated me like I was a problem to be solved. "I'm working," I said, my pulse starting to accelerate. "If this is about my daughter, if something happened—" "Your daughter is fine," the second man said. He was younger, darker hair, but the same unsettling calm. "This isn't about her." This is about an incident that occurred last week. Last week. My mind raced through every possibility. Had I been caught on camera taking the expired sandwiches from the break room trash? Had someone reported me for letting Piper wait in the lobby? Was I being fired? What incident? I asked, pulling off my gloves with shaking hands. Mr. Schgamon? Stone will explain, the first man said. We need you to come with us now. He knew something that no one else in the building did. Mr. Stone? The name meant nothing to me. I don't know anyone named. Now, Ms. Miller. It wasn't a request. The building manager appeared in the doorway behind them, his face arranged in an expression I couldn't quite read. Ms. Miller, please go with these gentlemen. Your shift has been covered. There was something in his tone, not quite deference, but close, like he'd been given orders he couldn't refuse. I followed them because I didn't know what else to do. We walked past the other cleaning staff, who all stopped working to watch me being escorted away. Maria crossed herself. That didn't help my anxiety. They led me to the service elevator, but instead of pressing the button for the ground floor, the older man swiped a keycard and pressed PH. Penthouse. From here on, the rules of the game changed. The Grandview Towers only had one penthouse. I'd never cleaned it. Different service company handled that floor, one that required background checks and security clearances. The elevator rose so smoothly I barely felt the motion, just the pressure in my ears as we climbed higher than I'd ever been in this building. The doors opened onto a private foyer with marble floors and a massive abstract painting that probably cost more than I'd earn in my entire lifetime. The two men gestured for me to follow them through double doors that opened into a space so large it took me a moment to process. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a man standing with his back to me, hands in his pockets, looking out at the view. Ms. Miller, he said without turning around. His voice was deep, controlled, the kind of voice used to being obeyed. Thank you for coming. I didn't really have a choice, I said, my own voice coming out more defensive than I'd intended. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. He turned then, and I got my first clear look at him. Tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3". Dark hair with threads of silver at the temples. A face that was handsome in a severe way. All sharp angles and controlled intensity. He wore a black suit without a tie, the collar of his white shirt open, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made the two men who'd brought me here look like amateurs at authority. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Dark gray, almost colorless, and absolutely unreadable. My name is Riker Stone, he said, and you don't know me, but 5 days ago your daughter saved my mother's life. The words hung in the air between us, making no sense. What followed next was completely unexpected. What? I managed. He moved to a side table and picked up a tablet, tapping the screen before holding it out to me. The video was high definition, clearly from a security camera, showing the street outside the jewelry store. Timestamp: 10:54 p.m. Last Thursday. I watched Piper step into traffic, watched the cab stop, watched us help the elderly woman into the back seat, watched Piper lean in and give instructions to the driver. The angle was perfect, capturing everything. That's my mother, Riker said quietly. Vivian Stone. She has early-stage Alzheimer's. She wandered away from her caretaker that night while I was in a meeting. By the time we realized she was gone, she'd been out in that rain for almost 2 hours. I stared at the frozen image of the woman's face on the screen. Those warm brown eyes I remembered. Your daughter stopped her from being ignored by 8 separate taxi drivers, Riker continued. She demanded that the driver take my mother all the way inside, which he did. Because of that, my mother is safe. She caught pneumonia from the exposure, but she survived. If she'd been out there much longer... He stopped, something flickering across his face before he controlled it. It would have been much worse. If you've ever felt invisible or been told you take up too much space, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is for you. And we're building a family of people who refuse to shrink. Comment where you're watching from. Let's take up space together. How did you find us? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I have resources, he said simply. The taxi driver's dash cam, street cameras, your building's security footage. It took my people less than 6 hours to identify you and your daughter. 6 hours. He'd had us under surveillance for almost a week and I'd never known. Something didn't add up. And the truth was darker than he expected. I want to repay you, Riker said. And your daughter. For what you did. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the penthouse that spoke of wealth I couldn't comprehend. At the 2 silent men who'd brought me here. At the tablet in my hands showing surveillance footage that suggested capabilities that should have frightened me more than they did. We don't want money, I said, holding the tablet out to him. He didn't take it. Everyone wants money, Ms. Miller. We're not everyone, I said, and I watched something shift in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Your mother needed help. We helped her. That's not a transaction. For a long moment, he just studied me, and I had the unsettling feeling of being evaluated in ways I couldn't predict. Like he was seeing past the stained uniform and cheap shoes to something underneath. For the first time, he wasn't in control. My mother remembers your daughter, he said finally. She's asked about her, about the angel child who helped her. She wants to thank her personally. That's not necessary, Miss K. Miller. He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to step back. I'm not asking for your daughter's sake. I'm asking for my mother's. She has so few moments of clarity left. This is one of them. Let her have it. I thought about Piper, about the locket she'd been wearing every day since that night, about the way she'd asked if she'd done the wrong thing. Okay, I said. But I want your personal contact information, not your people, not intermediaries. If you want access to my daughter, I want direct access to you. His eyebrows rose slightly. That's an unusual request. It's my only request, I said. Take it or leave it. For the first time, something that might have been approval crossed his face. He pulled a business card from his pocket and wrote a number on the back in swift, precise handwriting. My private cell, he said, handing it to me. It's never turned off. I took the card, our fingers brushing briefly. His hands were warm, calloused in unexpected places. I'll bring Piper to meet your mother, I said. But Mr. Stone, if I get even the slightest feeling that this is something other than what you're claiming, we're gone. You'll never find us again. He smiled then, just barely. Ms. Miller, I already found you once, but I respect the sentiment. He gestured to the 2 men. They'll take you back to your shift. I was at the door when his voice stopped me. Ms. Miller, the money your daughter gave the driver. It was $50, yes? I turned slowly. Yes. The fare was $30. The driver kept the change as a tip. He paused. I'm having $20 sent to your account. That's not payment. That's correction of an error. Before I could respond, the doors closed between us. Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. That night, after Piper was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a refurbished model I'd bought 3 years ago that barely functioned, and typed Riker Stone into the search bar. The results loaded slowly, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Legitimate businesses, import/export companies, real estate holdings. But underneath the professional veneer, buried in forum posts and true crime blogs and carefully worded investigative journalism pieces, was another story. Organized crime. Money laundering allegations that never stuck. associates who'd disappeared or died in convenient accidents, connections to families whose names appeared in federal investigations that always seemed to go nowhere. One article called him the ghost of the East Side, too smart to get caught, too powerful to be touched. Another showed a photograph from a charity gala, Riker Stone in a tuxedo shaking hands with the mayor, and the caption noted that 3 of the people in the background were currently under federal indictment. But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, and thought about his cold gray eyes, his perfect suit, the way those 2 men had moved like soldiers, the surveillance footage that had tracked us through the city. My daughter's locket sat on the counter, gleaming in the dim light. What had we walked into? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those search results. The photograph of Riker Stone at what the article had called a suspected organized crime wedding. The list of associates who died in ways that were always ruled accidental. The federal investigation that had been dropped after key witnesses recanted their testimonies. By 6 a.m., I'd made 17 versions of the same decision. Don't go. Don't bring Piper anywhere near him. Block the number he'd given me and hope he'd respect my choice to disappear. By 7 a.m., I'd reconsidered every single time. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. Because the truth was, we weren't invisible. He'd found us in 6 hours. If I tried to run, if I took Piper and left the city, how long would we last? And more importantly, would running make us look guilty of something? Would it make us look like a threat? The business card sat on my kitchen table, that phone number written in his precise handwriting staring at me like an accusation. At 3 p.m., while Piper was still at school, I texted the number. This is Brielle Miller. We can meet your mother this Saturday. Public place. I choose the location. The response came within 30 seconds. Agreed. Send me the address by Friday. RS. I chose Riverside Park, the section near the conservatory gardens where there were always people, always witnesses, always escape routes. I chose 2 p.m. because it was daylight, because the park would be crowded with weekend families, because every instinct I had screamed at me to control whatever variables I could. His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. Friday night, I sat Piper down at our kitchen table. Remember the lady we helped last week? I asked. The one who gave you the locket? Piper's hand went immediately to the chain around her neck. Yeah? Her son found us. He wants to thank you in person. And she wants to see you again. I paused, choosing my words carefully. But baby, I need you to understand something. These are people with a lot of money and a lot of power. We need to be careful around them. Careful how? Piper asked, her eyes too wise for 10 years old. Just stay close to me. Don't go anywhere alone with anyone. And if I say we need to leave, we leave immediately. No questions, okay? Okay, she said quietly. Then, Mom, are we in trouble? No, I said, pulling her close. No, we're not in trouble. But we need to be smart. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth. The kind of November afternoon that felt like the world had forgotten what season it was. Piper wore her nicest outfit, a dress from the thrift store that still had the tags on it when I'd bought it for $3. I'd pressed it carefully, fixed a loose button, made her look as presentable as I could manage. I wore my only pair of jeans that didn't have holes, and a sweater I usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences. We both looked like we were trying very hard, which we were. We arrived at the park at 1:55 p.m. I'd scoped out the location the day before, identifying exits and sightlines like I was planning a military operation instead of meeting an elderly woman and her son. He realized he wasn't alone. Someone else had arrived. They were already there. Riker Stone stood near a bench overlooking the gardens. wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Casual clothes, but they didn't make him look less dangerous. If anything, seeing him outside the corporate penthouse made the coiled tension in his posture more obvious. Beside him sat his mother in a wheelchair, wrapped in a beautiful wool blanket, her silver hair neatly styled. Even from a distance, I could see her scanning the park with those warm brown eyes, searching. When she saw Piper, her entire face transformed. "Tesoro mio," she breathed, loud enough for me to hear as we approached. "My angel." Piper moved forward hesitantly, and I kept pace beside her, my hand on her shoulder. But when we reached the bench, Vivian reached out with both hands, and Piper took them without fear. "You are wearing it," Vivian said in careful English, touching the locket at Piper's throat. "This makes me happy. You keep me warm that night. You save me." "I'm glad you're okay," Piper said softly. "I was worried about you." "Preoccupata," worried. Vivian smiled. "Such a good heart. Your mama, she teaches you this?" "My mom's the best person I know," Piper said simply, and something in my chest cracked. Riker had been watching this exchange in silence, but now his eyes moved to me. "Ms. Miller, thank you for coming." "You didn't give me much choice," I said, keeping my voice low enough that Vivian and Piper couldn't hear. "I always give people choices," he said. "You could have refused. You could have run. You didn't. You would have found us again." "Yes," he said simply. "But that's not why you came. You came because you saw how much this meant to my mother." He wasn't wrong. And I hated that he'd read me so easily. For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. We stood there for a moment, watching Piper and Vivian. The elderly woman was showing Piper something in a photo album she'd brought, pointing at pictures and laughing at something Piper said. The sound was light and genuine, and I realized I was seeing a version of Vivian Stone that probably few people got to see anymore. "The doctors say her lucid moments are becoming less frequent," Riker said quietly. "Eventually she won't remember this. Won't remember your daughter or that night, or probably won't remember me." His jaw tightened. "But right now, she remembers. And that's something I can't buy, no matter how much money I have." There was pain in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. And despite everything I knew about him, despite every warning bell screaming in my head, I felt something twist in my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "Don't be," he said. "Being sorry doesn't change anything. I learned that a long time ago." An hour passed, then another. Vivian talked to Piper about her childhood in Sicily, about the lemon groves and the ocean, and her own mother who'd made lace by hand. Piper listened like she was hearing the most important story in the world, asking questions that made Vivian light up with remembered joy. I watched Riker watch them, and I saw something in his face that didn't match the man from the search results. Something vulnerable and fiercely protective that he probably didn't show to anyone. Someone in the room was lying. But who? Finally, as the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Vivian's energy began to fade. Her words came slower, her confusion creeping back in around the edges. "We should go," Riker said gently, touching his mother's shoulder. But Vivian grabbed Piper's hand one more time. "You come see me again? Per favore?" Piper looked at me, uncertain. I wanted to say no. I wanted to take her hand and walk away and never look back. Instead, I heard myself say, "If your son invites us." Riker's eyes met mine, and something passed between us that I couldn't name. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of a debt that couldn't be easily settled. And suddenly, he realized he was being played. "I'm inviting you," he said. "Both of you. My mother has a private nurse, but she doesn't have someone who makes her laugh like this. Someone who listens like she's the only person in the world." He paused. "I'd like to hire you, Ms. Miller, as a companion for my mother." The offer hung in the air between us, impossible and terrifying. "I'm a maid," I said. "I don't have training in elder care. I don't have medical knowledge. I don't have—" "You have compassion," he interrupted. "You have patience. And my mother trusts you, which is something money absolutely cannot buy." He named a salary that made my vision blur. "That's weekly, plus benefits, plus housing if you need it." It was more than I made in 3 months. More than enough to pay every bill, to give Piper everything she needed, to stop living on the razor's edge of poverty. It was also too good to be true. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course." He pulled out another business card, this one embossed, professional. "My assistant's information. Call her when you've decided." "But, Ms. Miller?" He stepped closer, and I forced myself to hold my ground. "Think carefully about what you're walking away from, and what your daughter deserves." It felt like a threat and a promise all at once. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. That night, after Piper fell asleep, I went back to my laptop. This time, I didn't just search for Riker Stone. I searched for everything. His business holdings, his associates, his family history, the federal investigations that had touched him but never stuck, the bodies that seemed to accumulate in the periphery of his world like collateral damage. But I also found other things: charity foundations in his name, anonymous donations to children's hospitals, a medical research wing named after his late father, scholarships for underprivileged students. The picture that emerged was complicated, dangerous, yes, probably criminal in ways that would never be proven, but also someone who protected what was his with absolute ruthlessness. The question was, if I accepted his offer, would Piper and I become something he protected, or something he destroyed? He trusted her, and that was his biggest mistake. At 3 a.m., I stared at the business card with his assistant's number and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I would meet with him one more time. I would demand answers to questions he probably wouldn't want to answer. And I would make him promise something that might be impossible. But first, I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. I picked up my phone and called the number he'd given me. It rang twice. "Ms. Miller?" His voice was alert, no trace of sleep. Like he'd been waiting for my call. "It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is," I said. "I have questions before I make my decision. Real questions. And I want real answers." There was a pause. Then, "Ask. Are you a criminal?" "That's a complicated question." "Then give me a complicated answer." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "I operate in spaces where the law is interpretive. I protect my interests and the interests of people I care about. Sometimes those protections require methods that wouldn't stand up in court." "That's not an answer," I said. "It's the only answer you're going to get," he replied. "Because anything more specific puts you at risk. Information is leverage, Ms. Miller, and I won't give anyone leverage over you. Not even yourself." It should have frightened me. Instead, it felt strangely honest. His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. "If I accept your offer," I said slowly, "if I bring my daughter into your world, can you promise me she'll be safe?" "Yes." No hesitation. No qualification. "How can you be sure?" "Because nothing in this world matters to me more than my mother's safety. And if you become part of her life, you become part of what I protect. Absolutely. Completely. With everything I have." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me realize the full weight of what he was offering. Protection that came with a price I couldn't quite see yet. "I'll call your assistant Monday morning," I said. "We'll discuss terms. But Mr. Stone? If I do this, I'm doing it for my daughter. For the chance to give her a life that doesn't involve waiting in lobbies at midnight and rationing food. Not because I trust you. I understand, he said quietly. Trust has to be earned. I'm willing to earn it. I hung up and sat in the dark, wondering if I'd just made the best decision of my life or the worst. If you're rooting for Brielle and Piper like I am, subscribe and join our family. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this journey together. Outside, the city hummed with its usual late-night sounds. Sirens in the distance. Traffic on the main roads. The ordinary chaos of millions of lives intersecting in countless ways. And somewhere in that chaos, Riker Stone was probably still awake, making calculations I couldn't begin to understand, protecting interests that might now include me and my daughter. I'd stepped off the cliff. Now I just had to hope there was something to catch us at the bottom. The Stone residence wasn't what I expected. I'd anticipated a fortress. Cold marble and bulletproof glass and security cameras on every corner. Instead, the address Riker's assistant had given me led to a restored brownstone in a tree-lined neighborhood that looked almost normal, if you ignored the subtle security measures I was beginning to recognize. The cameras disguised as architectural details, the reinforced door frames, the way the neighboring brownstones all seemed to have sightlines that covered every approach. What she found in the envelope froze her in place. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after my phone call. Piper had a half day at school, and I'd taken her out early, telling her principal we had a family meeting. Not technically a lie, though I still wasn't sure what this was. Riker himself opened the door. He wore dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, and without the suit jacket, I could see the lean muscle of his forearms and the edge of what might have been a scar disappearing under his collar. He looked younger like this, more approachable, though his eyes still held that controlled intensity that made me want to step back. Ms. Miller. Piper. He smiled at my daughter, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him. My mother has been asking about you every hour since Saturday. Is she okay? Piper asked immediately. Come see for yourself. He led us through the brownstone, and I took in every detail with the part of my brain that was still screaming this was a mistake. Hardwood floors, original crown molding, furniture that was expensive but comfortable, photographs on the walls, Vivian as a young woman, beautiful and laughing, Riker as a child with his father, both of them formal and serious. Family, preserved in silver frames. It looked like a home, not a headquarters. He thought it was over, until he noticed something strange. The living room overlooked a small private garden, and Vivian sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket across her lap, afternoon sun turning her silver hair gold. A nurse sat nearby, reading, but she stood when we entered. Mrs. Stone, your guests are here, she said gently. Vivian turned, and her face lit up when she saw Piper. Tesoro! She held out both hands. You came. I tell Riker you would come, but he worries. Always worries. Piper went to her without hesitation, and I watched my daughter kneel beside the wheelchair, taking Vivian's hands like they'd known each other for years instead of days. I brought you something, Piper said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I drew it in art class. It's the park where we met. She unfolded it carefully, a colored pencil drawing of Riverside Park, the conservatory gardens in the background, 2 figures on a bench. Simple but detailed, the kind of art that showed genuine care. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. This is beautiful. This is... Riker, look what she make for me. Riker moved closer, looking over his mother's shoulder, and I saw his jaw tighten. It's perfect, Piper. Thank you. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, caught my gaze and gestured toward the kitchen. I followed her, leaving Piper and Vivian examining the drawing. I'm Sarah, she said quietly once we were out of earshot. I've been with Mrs. Stone for 8 months. You should know, she doesn't connect with people anymore. Not really. The Alzheimer's has made her suspicious of strangers, confused by faces she's known her whole life. But your daughter? She shook her head. She remembers her, asks for her, lights up when she sees her. That's rare. That's precious. I don't understand why, I said. Neither do I, Sarah admitted. Sometimes with this disease, there's no logic to what sticks and what fades. But Mr. Stone is right to want to preserve this for as long as it lasts. She paused. He's a good son. Whatever else he is, however complicated his business might be, he's devoted to his mother. I've worked for a lot of wealthy families, and most of them warehouse their aging parents in facilities and visit on Christmas. Not him. He's here every day, sometimes twice a day. It matched what I'd observed, but hearing it confirmed by someone who had no reason to lie made something shift in my chest. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. We returned to the living room to find Riker setting up an old record player, carefully placing a vinyl disc on the turntable. Italian opera filled the room, and Vivian closed her eyes, swaying slightly. Puccini, she murmured. La Bohème. My mother, she plays this when I am a little girl. She opened her eyes, looking at Piper. You like music? I like all kinds of music, Piper said. My mom plays it when we clean our apartment. She says it makes the work go faster. Your mama is smart. Music is... Vivian struggled for the word, frustrated. Magico. Magic. It makes everything more beautiful. They listened together while Riker and I stood to the side. I was aware of him watching me, evaluating, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. She's not performing for you, I said quietly. Piper, I mean, this is just who she is. I know, he said. That's what makes it remarkable. She has no agenda, no angle. She's just... kind. When was the last time you met someone like that in your world, Ms. Miller? My world? I raised an eyebrow. As opposed to yours? Yes. No apology in his voice. In my world, kindness is almost always transactional. People are nice to me because I have power. Because I can give them something or hurt them if I don't. Even my closest associates have an angle. He watched Piper and his mother, something wistful crossing his face. But your daughter stopped traffic for a stranger in the rain. She gave away money you couldn't afford to lose. She drew a picture in art class because she thought it would make an old woman happy. There's no calculation in that. No strategy. Just genuine human decency. You say that like it's exotic, I said. In my world? It is. He didn't want revenge. He needed it. The opera swelled, and Vivian began to hum along, off-key but joyful. Piper joined her, not knowing the words but matching the melody, and they laughed together like conspirators sharing a secret. Riker turned to me, and the vulnerability I'd seen glimpses of before was fully present now. I want to hire you, Ms. Miller, not as a nurse. Sarah handles all the medical care. Not as a caretaker. I have people for that. I want to hire you to be what you already are. Someone who treats my mother like a person, not a patient. Someone who makes her laugh. Someone who gives her back pieces of herself that the disease is stealing. I'm not qualified, I said, the protest automatic. You're the only person qualified. He named the salary again, the same impossible number from Saturday. Weekly, plus full health insurance for you and Piper, plus a housing stipend if you need to move closer. Plus... Why? I interrupted. Why are you offering this much for something that sounds like companionship? Because I've tried everything else. His voice was low, intense. I've hired the best nurses, the best doctors, the most experienced memory care specialists. They keep her alive, they manage her medications, they make sure she's physically comfortable. But they don't make her happy. They don't make her remember who she used to be, even if it's just for a few hours. He paused. You do. Your daughter does. And I will pay anything to give my mother that gift for whatever time she has left. It should have felt manipulative. Instead, it felt desperately honest. I need to think about it, I said, though we both knew my answer was already shifting. Of course. He pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. I'm having my assistant send you the formal offer letter. It includes all the details, hours, benefits, expectations. Take your time. Review it. Ask questions. But Ms. Miller? He met my eyes directly. I meant what I said on the phone. If you accept this position, you and your daughter become part of what I protect. That's not a small thing. That's everything. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. The weight of that statement hung between us, and I understood what he was really saying. Accept this job, and we'd be stepping into his world completely. Under his protection, yes, but also under his watch. Becoming part of the machinery of his life in ways I couldn't fully predict. But I also thought about Piper's worn canvas bag, the calculator on my phone showing numbers that never added up, the electric bill notices and the 2 small school lunches, and the fear that lived permanently in my chest that one emergency, one unexpected expense, would topple the careful tower of our survival. I'll read the offer letter, I said, and I'll have an answer by tomorrow. That evening, after Piper had fallen asleep clutching the thank you note Vivian had written for her drawing, I opened my laptop and read through the employment contract Riker's assistant had sent. It was extensive, legal language that I had to parse slowly, but the terms were exactly as he'd described. The salary was listed in black and white, more money than I'd imagined making in my entire life, offered as a weekly payment. Health insurance that covered everything, no deductibles, no co-pays. A housing stipend that would let us move out of our 4th floor walk-up into something safe and warm. But there were other clauses too. Non-disclosure agreements, security protocols, emergency contact requirements, language about protecting the family's privacy and adhering to unspecified security measures. It was a contract that bound me to him in ways that went beyond simple employment. Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. I should have been terrified. Instead, I thought about Piper's face when Vivian had called her tesoro, treasure, about the way she'd hummed along to opera she'd never heard before, completely unself-conscious, completely present. About the way Riker had looked at both of them like they were something precious he was afraid to break. At midnight, I picked up my phone and texted his private number. I accept. When do I start? The response came within seconds. Monday. Welcome to the family, Ms. Miller. I stared at those words, welcome to the family, and felt everything in my life shift irrevocably. I'd made my choice. I'd taken the leap. Now I just had to hope I could survive the landing. Saturday morning, Riker's assistant called and asked if I could come to the brownstone alone. Mr. Stone would like to discuss the security protocols before your official start date, she explained. It won't take long. I'd asked Mrs. Chen to watch Piper for 2 hours, paying her from the $20 that had mysteriously appeared in my account after that first meeting. The same $20 that confirmed Riker Stone kept his word, even about small things. He had no idea the night would end in blood. Riker met me at the door again, but this time he looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested whatever had kept him awake wasn't good news. Is Vivian okay? I asked immediately. She's fine. She's napping. He gestured toward his office, a room I hadn't seen before, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk covered in file folders and what looked like surveillance photos. This is about something else. I followed him in, my instincts prickling. The office was clearly his operational headquarters. Multiple computer screens, a wall of monitors showing security feeds from various locations, a locked cabinet that probably contained things I didn't want to know about. He closed the door behind us and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Before you officially accept this position, you need to understand something. My world is dangerous. Not hypothetically, not theoretically, actually dangerous. People want what I have. They want my assets, my territory, my connections. And they'll use any leverage they can find. Including your mother, I said quietly. Yes, including my mother. His jaw tightened. I have extensive security measures in place. This building is protected. My mother is never without security detail when she leaves this house. Sarah is trained in emergency protocols. But if you become part of this household, if your daughter becomes someone my mother loves and asks for, we become targets too, I finished. Yes. No apology. Just brutal honesty. I can protect you. I will protect you. But I need you to understand what you're accepting. This isn't just a job where you show up, keep my mother company, and go home to your separate life. This is integration. This is becoming part of something that comes with real risks. What she said next shattered his trust instantly. I should have walked out. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to take Piper and run as far as we could. But I thought about the numbers in that contract. About the health insurance that meant Piper could finally get her cavity filled and have regular checkups instead of emergency room visits we couldn't afford. About not having to choose between electricity and food. What kind of risks? I asked. He moved to one of the computer screens and pulled up what looked like a security report. 3 months ago, a business rival tried to use my mother as leverage. They planned to kidnap her, use her to force me into giving up territory. His voice was flat, controlled. They didn't succeed. They won't succeed again because I made sure they understood what happens when people threaten what's mine. The implication was clear, and I felt my stomach turn. You killed them, I said. I eliminated the threat. He met my eyes directly. I'm not going to lie to you, Ms. Miller. I'm not going to pretend I'm something I'm not. I operate in a world where violence is sometimes necessary, where protection means being willing to do things that keep you up at night. But I want you to understand something. I don't enjoy it. I don't choose it casually. But when someone threatens my family, I don't hesitate. And if I accept this job, Piper and I become your family, I said slowly. Yes. The word hung between us, heavy with implications I was still trying to process. And then, the gun clicked. I have conditions, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to bring my daughter into your world, you need to agree to them, non-negotiable. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or approval. Name them. First, if there's ever a direct threat to Piper, not hypothetical but real and immediate, you tell me. Immediately. No filters, no sugarcoating, no trying to protect me from information. I need to know so I can make decisions about her safety. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Second, I'm not signing any contract that prevents me from leaving. If I decide this isn't working, if I feel like Piper is in danger, I can walk away. No penalties, no legal action, no... I gestured at the surveillance equipment. No tracking or finding us again. He was quiet for a longer moment, and I watched him struggle with something internal. Finally, agreed, with one condition of my own. What? If you leave, you tell me why. You give me a chance to fix whatever made you feel unsafe. You don't just disappear without giving me that opportunity. It was reasonable, and I nodded. Okay. Third condition. Piper doesn't know about whatever it is you actually do. She knows you as your mother's son, a businessman, someone who's protective and careful. But she doesn't know about the violence or the danger or any of it. She gets to stay innocent for as long as possible. I have no intention of exposing your daughter to my business, he said quietly. She and my mother are the only truly good things in my life, Ms. Miller. I'm not going to ruin that. The raw honesty in his voice made something crack in my chest. Last condition, I said, my throat tight. You're honest with me. Maybe not about everything. I understand there are things I'm better off not knowing. But about anything that affects Piper, or your mother, or my safety. No lies. No manipulation. I can handle the truth, but I can't handle being manipulated. He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to back away. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. Ms. Miller, Brielle, I've built my entire life on calculation and strategy, on controlling information and using leverage. But I promise you this, I will never manipulate you. I will never lie to you about your safety or your daughter's safety. You have my word. Your word, I said. In your world, what does that mean? Everything. No hesitation. My word is the only currency that actually matters. I can lose money, lose territory, lose assets. But if I lose my word, I lose everything. So when I give it, I keep it. Always. I believed him. I didn't know if that made me smart or catastrophically stupid, but I believed him. Okay, I said. I accept the position. All the terms in the contract, plus the conditions we just agreed to. He extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm, warm, and I felt the calluses again. The proof that whatever else he wasn't someone who'd spent his whole life behind a desk. Welcome to the family, he said again, and this time it felt real. Not just a phrase, but a commitment that bound us together in ways I was only beginning to understand. But what he discovered next changed everything. The office door opened, and Vivian appeared in her wheelchair, Sarah pushing her carefully over the threshold. She looked between us, her expression sharp with an awareness that came and went like the sun through clouds. You are staying, Vivian said to me, and it wasn't a question. Yes, I said. I'm staying. Good. She gestured impatiently for Sarah to wheel her closer. My son, he is... She struggled for the word, complicado. Complicated. He thinks he must be strong all the time. Must protect everyone. Must never show he is tired or afraid. She reached out and took Riker's hand, then mine, placing them together. But he needs someone who sees him. Not the money. Not the power. Him. Riker's expression cracked, just for a moment, and I saw past all the controlled intensity to something raw and vulnerable underneath. Mama, he said quietly. You are a good boy, she said, patting his cheek. But you are lonely. This girl... She nodded at me. She has a strong heart. Like me when I was young. She will keep you honest. Then she turned to Sarah, already forgetting what she'd just said, asking about lunch in a way that suggested she didn't remember she'd just delivered something profound. Sarah wheeled her out, leaving Riker and I standing there with our hands still touching. I should have pulled away. Instead, I found myself studying his face. The sharp angles, the shadow of stubble, the gray eyes that held so much carefully controlled emotion. Your mother is wise, I said quietly. She was always the wise one, he said. Even now, when she's losing herself, she sees things more clearly than anyone else in my life. He paused. She's right, you know. I am lonely. Have been for years. Built these walls, made these choices, protected my interests so well that I forgot what it felt like to have someone actually care about me. Not about what I could give them or what I could do for them, just me. The confession made my breath catch. I'm not here to fix your loneliness, I said, but my voice was gentler than I intended. I know. He released my hand slowly. You're here for my mother. for the salary that changes your daughter's life, for the security and the health insurance and all the practical reasons that make sense. But maybe, he met my eyes, maybe we can find something else too. Something neither of us expected. It felt like a promise and a warning all at once. Maybe, I said, because I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, the dangerous attraction to a man I should be running from, not moving toward. He smiled, just barely. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Wear whatever makes you comfortable. This isn't a formal position, and my mother responds better to real people than to uniforms. I nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Brielle? I looked back. Thank you, for giving her back pieces of herself, for giving my home something it's been missing for a very long time. What's that? I asked. Hope, he said simply. If this story has touched your heart even a little, go ahead and subscribe. Join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I left the brownstone and walked to Mrs. Chen's apartment to pick up Piper, and the whole way there, I felt like I was moving through a dream. I'd just agreed to step fully into Riker Stone's world. I'd accepted his protection and his promises. I'd let him see my desperation and my strength in equal measure. And somehow, impossibly, I'd started to trust him. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough, and that terrified me more than anything else. The weeks that followed established a pattern. I arrived every morning at 8, spent 6 hours with Vivian, and left in time to pick up Piper from school. Some days were good, Vivian laughing and lucid, telling stories, singing old songs. Some days were difficult, confusion and fear and the heartbreaking reality of watching someone disappear. But something else was happening too. The brownstones started to feel familiar. Sarah and I developed a seamless handoff routine. I learned Vivian's triggers and comforts, the specific songs that calmed her, the photographs that made her smile. And Riker was always there, somewhere in the periphery. He'd appear during his mother's lunch, sitting quietly while I fed her. Not interfering, but present. He'd walk into the living room while I read to her, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, just watching. Sometimes he'd arrive late at night, after I'd technically left for the day but had stayed because Vivian was having a difficult evening. I'd hear the front door open, his footsteps in the hall, and then he'd appear looking exhausted and tense, still wearing whatever he'd worn to whatever meeting or business had kept him out. One night, 3 weeks into my employment, I was sitting with Vivian at 11 p.m. She'd been agitated all evening, convinced that she needed to cook dinner for her mother, who'd been dead for 40 years. Sarah had finally gotten her settled, and I was about to leave when Riker came home. He stopped in the doorway of the living room, taking in the scene, me curled up on the couch with my shoes off, his mother asleep in her wheelchair nearby, the only light coming from a single lamp in the corner. "You're still here," he said quietly. "She had a hard night. I wanted to make sure she was really settled before I left. Sarah could have handled it. I know, but I wanted to stay." He moved into the room, loosening his tie, and sank into the chair across from me with a heavy exhale. For a moment, he just sat there, eyes closed, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. "Long day?" I asked. "Long week." He opened his eyes, and they were darker than usual, shadowed with something that looked like exhaustion mixed with something harder. "But I came home, and my mother is asleep and peaceful, and you're here. And suddenly the day doesn't feel quite as heavy." The admission was raw, unguarded, and I saw past all his careful control to the man underneath. Someone who carried impossible weight and rarely let anyone see the strain. "You should get some rest," I said softly. "I should," he agreed, but he didn't move. But I find myself not wanting to, not wanting this moment to end. "What moment?" "This." He gestured vaguely at the room. coming home to something that feels like home. Not a building I protect, not an asset I maintain. Home. Do you know how long it's been since I felt that? I shook my head. Years, he said. Maybe my whole adult life. I made choices early on that required sacrifices. One of those sacrifices was the illusion of normalcy. Of having a place that felt safe and warm and like it belonged to me, instead of to the business, to the obligations, to the endless calculations. And now? I asked. Now I walk through that door and smell whatever Sarah cooked for dinner. I hear my mother laughing at something you said. I see you sitting on my couch with your shoes off like you belong here. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I want to be here. I'm not just fulfilling an obligation to check on my mother. I'm actually coming home. The words settled between us, heavy with meaning I wasn't quite ready to examine. Your mother is easy to love, I said, deflecting slightly. And you? He asked, his voice low. Are you easy to love, Brielle Miller? The question stole my breath. I don't know. I've never really had the chance to find out. What about Piper's father? Gone before she was born, I said. He made it very clear that he wasn't interested in being a parent or a partner. I've been on my own since then. That must have been hard. It was. It still is. But I'd rather be alone than with someone who makes me feel small or afraid, or like I need to constantly prove my worth. The admission came easier than it should have. I spent my whole childhood watching my father make my mother feel that way. I promised myself I'd never accept that for myself, or model it for my daughter. Riker leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying me with an intensity that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I'm not strong. I'm just surviving. There's a difference. No, he said firmly. Surviving is getting through one more day. What you've done, raising a daughter who's kind and thoughtful and brave, working multiple jobs to keep her safe, refusing to compromise your dignity even when it would be easier, that's not just survival. That's strength. Something in my chest cracked open, some carefully guarded place I'd kept protected for years. Don't do that. Do what? See me like that. See me as more than I am. I'm not seeing you as more than you are, he said quietly. I'm seeing you exactly as you are. And that's what terrifies you, isn't it? Having someone actually see you and not look away. He was right, and I hated that he was right. I should go, I said, reaching for my shoes. It's late, and Piper's with Mrs. Chen, and… Brielle. His voice stopped me. Stay. Just for a few more minutes, please. I stayed. We sat there in the dim light, his mother sleeping peacefully nearby, the brownstone quiet around us. And for the first time since I'd stepped into Riker Stone's world, I felt something shift. Not the fear or the calculation or the constant awareness of danger. Just peace. Like I'd found something I hadn't known I was looking for. Thank you, Riker said finally. For what? For making this place feel like a home again. For giving me a reason to want to come back at night instead of just an obligation to fulfill. He paused. For seeing my mother as a person worth loving, even when she can't remember who you are from one day to the next. She's easy to love, I said again. So are you, he replied, and the simple honesty in his voice made my breath catch. I left shortly after that, walking to the bus stop with my heart pounding and my mind spinning. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, something had changed. I'd stopped seeing Riker Stone as a dangerous man I was working for, and started seeing him as just Riker. Complicated and burdened and lonely and fiercely protective of the few people he allowed close. And the most terrifying part wasn't that he was dangerous. It was that I was starting to trust him anyway. The invitation came on a Wednesday evening, delivered by text to my personal phone. My mother would like Piper to visit this Saturday. If you're comfortable with it. Lunch. Nothing formal. RS. I stared at the message, weighing the implications. Piper had asked about Vivian repeatedly over the past few weeks, wanting to know how she was doing, if she remembered the drawing, if she'd liked the stories I'd told her. My daughter had formed a genuine attachment, and I knew refusing would hurt her, but it also meant bringing Piper deeper into Riker's world. Not just as an abstract concept, but as a reality she'd be part of. Piper would love that, I texted back. Should I bring anything? Just yourselves. 1 p.m.? We'll be there. Saturday arrived with early winter sunshine, the kind of bright, cold day that made the city look clean and new. Piper had insisted on wearing her nicest dress, the same one from our first meeting with Vivian, and she'd carefully wrapped a new drawing in tissue paper. Do you think she'll remember me? Piper asked on the bus ride over. I don't know, baby, I said honestly. Sometimes Mrs. Stone has very clear days. Sometimes she's confused. But even if she doesn't remember your name, I know she'll be happy to see you. Riker met us at the door wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Piper, he said, smiling. My mother has been asking about you all morning. She wanted to make sure we had the right kind of cookies. What's the right kind? Piper asked seriously. Chocolate. Apparently, angels only eat chocolate cookies. His eyes flicked to me, warm with amusement. Her words, not mine. Vivian was in the living room, dressed in a beautiful lavender cardigan, her hair carefully styled. When she saw Piper, her whole face transformed. Tesoro mio. She held out both hands. You came. I tell Riker you would come. I remember you. You are my angel child. Piper rushed forward, carefully hugging Vivian before presenting the wrapped drawing. I made this for you. It's our garden in the spring. I added flowers because you said your mother grew roses. Vivian unwrapped it with shaking hands, and I watched her eyes fill with tears. The drawing showed the brownstones' garden, but Piper had imagined it in full bloom. Roses climbing the walls, flowers in wild abundance, butterflies hovering over the blooms. This is beautiful, Vivian breathed. Bellissima. You make my mother's garden live again. You are so talented, Piccola. They settled into an easy conversation, Vivian showing Piper old photographs from her albums, Piper asking questions with genuine interest. I stood back with Riker, watching them together. She's been lucid all morning, Riker said quietly. I think she was saving it for Piper. The mind is strange that way, I said, holding on to what matters most, even when everything else slips away. Lunch was relaxed, informal, pasta that Riker had made himself, surprisingly competent in the kitchen. Vivian ate more than I'd seen her eat in weeks, animated and engaged, telling Piper stories about learning to cook from her mother. After lunch, Vivian grew tired, and Sarah took her for an afternoon rest. Piper helped clear the table, and Riker sent her into the garden with instructions to find whatever needs exploring. Once she was outside, visible through the window but out of earshot, Riker turned to me. Can I show you something? I followed him upstairs to the second floor, to a room I hadn't seen before. He opened the door to reveal a space that had been completely transformed. Bookshelves along one wall, a comfortable reading chair by the window, a desk with art supplies carefully arranged. Children's books mixed with young adult novels, a telescope in the corner, posters of constellations on the walls. What is this? I asked. A room for Piper, he said. If she wants it. I know you have your own apartment, and I'm not trying to pressure you into anything. But I thought, if she wanted a place here, somewhere she could come after school or on weekends, somewhere that was hers. He stopped, suddenly uncertain. Is this too much? Did I overstep? I stared at the room. at the care that had gone into every detail. The books chosen for a 10-year-old girl who loved learning, the art supplies for a child who drew pictures for elderly women, the telescope for someone who might want to look at stars. "When did you do this?" I asked, my voice thick. "This week. I wanted it ready in case—" He stopped again. "In case you decided to stay. Not just as my mother's companion, but as part of this household. Permanently." The implication was enormous, terrifying, and I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. "Riker." "I know it's fast," he said, his words coming quickly now, like he'd been holding them back and couldn't anymore. "I know we've only known each other for a few weeks. But Brielle, when I come home and you're here, when I hear my mother laughing because of something you said, when I see your daughter treating mine with such genuine kindness, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Hope. Connection. The possibility that my life could be more than just business and protection and endless calculation." "You barely know me," I said, even as part of me wanted to step closer instead of away. "I know you wake up at 5 a.m. to prep your daughter's lunch because you want her to have something homemade. I know you sold your winter coat to make sure your electric bill got paid. I know you've been reading to my mother from poetry books at night because she mentioned once that she loved poetry. I know you see people, really see them, in a way that's rare and precious." He paused. "What else do I need to know?" "That I'm terrified," I admitted. "Of this, of you, of what it means to let someone in who operates in a world I don't understand, of what happens to Piper if I make the wrong choice." "You think I'm not terrified?" His laugh was short, humorless. "Brielle, I've built my entire adult life on control, on knowing every angle, calculating every risk, maintaining absolute authority over my environment. And then you walked into my life, and suddenly I'm lying awake at night thinking about how you take your coffee, and whether you're warm enough in that apartment, and if your daughter needs better winter boots." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "You've destroyed my control. And the terrifying part is that I don't want it back." We stood there in Piper's potential room, surrounded by evidence of his care, and I felt every wall I'd carefully constructed start to crack. "I can't promise you anything," I said quietly. "I can't promise I won't get scared and run. I can't promise I'm ready for whatever this is between us. I can't even promise I'll make the right choices for Piper." "I'm not asking for promises," he said, stepping closer. "I'm asking for a chance. Stay for dinner tonight. Let Piper explore this room. Let yourself imagine what it might be like to not have to fight so hard every day. To have someone who wants to fight alongside you instead." "I've never had that," I whispered. "Neither have I." His hand came up, not quite touching my face but close enough that I could feel the warmth. "But I want to try, if you're willing." Before I could respond, Piper's voice called up from downstairs. "Mom! Mr. Stone! Mrs. Stone is awake, and she wants to show me how to make pasta." The moment broke, but something had shifted between us. Some acknowledgement of what was growing, however terrifying and complicated it might be. We went downstairs to find Vivian in the kitchen, flour already dusted across the counter, more animated than I'd seen her in days. The afternoon dissolved into pasta making and laughter. Vivian's hands remembering movements her mind had forgotten, showing Piper how to roll dough and cut ribbons with practiced ease. Riker stood beside me, and at some point, his hand found mine. I didn't pull away. As evening settled in and we sat down to eat the pasta we'd made together, Vivian looked around the table, at Riker, at me, at Piper covered in flour and grinning, and said something in Italian that made Riker's expressions soften. "What did she say?" I asked. She said, "Finally, my son has a family again." His eyes met mine. "She's been saying it all week, every time I mention you. I thought it was the dementia, the confusion. But maybe, he paused, maybe she sees something I've been too afraid to acknowledge. After dinner, Piper explored her potential room with wide eyes and careful reverence, touching the books and the art supplies like they were precious artifacts. When I tucked her into bed that night back in our own apartment, Riker had insisted his driver take us home. She looked at me with her two wise eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "Mr. Stone talks to you like you're important." "What do you mean?" "Like, when you talk, he listens. Really listens. Not like he's waiting for his turn to speak, but like what you say actually matters to him." She paused. "Nobody's ever looked at you like that before." The observation struck something deep in my chest. "How does he look at me?" "Like you're the most interesting person in the world," Piper said simply. "Like he's been waiting his whole life to meet someone exactly like you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just kissed her forehead and turned off the light. But later, lying in my own bed, I thought about Riker's face across the dinner table, about the room he'd created for Piper without being asked, about the way his hand had felt in mine, warm and solid and certain. And I thought about Vivian's words. Finally, my son has a family again. Maybe she was seeing something clearly that the rest of us were too scared to acknowledge. Maybe in her moments of confusion, she was actually seeing the truth more clearly than anyone. I fell asleep with my phone on the pillow beside me, and when it buzzed at midnight with a text, I wasn't surprised. "Thank you for today, for giving my mother that joy, for letting Piper be part of our strange, complicated family, for maybe, possibly, considering staying. RS." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thank you for seeing us, for making Piper feel special, for giving me something I didn't know I was allowed to want." "What's that?" "A reason to come home that isn't just obligation." His response was immediate. "You've given me the same thing. Sleep well, Brielle. I'll see you Monday." But I didn't sleep well. I lay awake thinking about impossible things, dangerous things, things that felt like hope even though I'd trained myself not to hope. And somewhere across the city, I had the feeling Riker Stone was doing exactly the same. The threat came on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after I'd started working for Riker. I'd arrived at the brownstone at my usual time to find Sarah's face pale and tight, Vivian sleeping heavily under sedation, and Riker in his office with the door closed, his voice low and dangerous through the walls. "What happened?" I asked Sarah. "Someone tried to breach the property last night," she said quietly. "Security stopped them before they got inside, but..." She glanced toward Vivian's room. Mrs. Stone saw it happen. She was awake, looking out the window. She's been inconsolable since then, convinced people are trying to hurt her. Mr. Stone had the doctor sedate her an hour ago. My blood ran cold. "Who tried to breach the property?" "I don't know. Mr. Stone hasn't said. But Brielle?" She grabbed my arm. "He's different today. Angrier. Colder. Whoever these people are, he's dealing with them. And I don't think dealing means legal action." I knocked on the office door. Silence. Then, "Unless you're Sarah with an emergency, go away." "It's Brielle," I said. The door opened immediately. Riker looked like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. Behind him, the office monitors showed surveillance footage from multiple angles, frozen on images of 3 men in dark clothing approaching the brownstone's back entrance. "You shouldn't be here today," he said. "Where else would I be?" I pushed past him into the office. "Sarah said someone tried to break in, that Vivian saw it, that she's terrified." "It's handled," he said, but his voice was flat, dangerous. "The men have been dealt with. The property is secure. You and Piper are not in danger." Riker, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. What does dealt with mean? It means exactly what you think it means, he said. These men worked for someone who's been trying to move into my territory for months. They were sent here as a message, hurt my mother, force me to negotiate from weakness. I sent a message back. The person who hired them won't be a problem anymore. Neither will anyone else who thinks my family is a viable target. The careful neutrality in his voice was more terrifying than anger would have been. How many people did you kill? I asked. Does it matter? Yes, I said. It matters to me. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw him calculating how much truth I could handle. Finally, 4. The 3 men who came here, and the person who sent them. 4 people. Dead because they'd threatened Vivian. Dead because Riker Stone protected what was his with absolute brutality. I should have been horrified. Part of me was. But a larger part, the part that had watched Vivian wake up screaming from sedation, the part that knew my daughter could have been here, could have been in danger, that part understood. I need you to promise me something, I said. What? If there's ever a threat, not just attempted but actual, immediate to Piper specifically, I need you to tell me immediately. Not after it's handled, not when it's safe. Immediately. So I can get her somewhere secure. Brielle? No. I moved closer, holding his gaze. You promised me honesty about threats. You promised me you wouldn't manipulate me. So I need this promise right now. If my daughter is ever in direct danger because of your world, you tell me. Right away. Even if you think you can protect her, even if you think it's already handled, you tell me so I can make the choice about her safety. That's non-negotiable. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, if there's ever a direct, specific threat to Piper, you'll know within minutes. You have my word. Your word, I repeated. The only currency that matters. Yes. I believed him. But I also knew what I had to say next, even though it would hurt. I can't bring Piper here anymore. His expression cracked, just slightly. Brielle? I can't, I said, my voice breaking. I know you've made this place as safe as you can. I know you're protecting us. But someone tried to break in, and Vivian saw it. And what if next time they succeed? What if next time Piper is here, in that room you made for her, and someone decides the best way to hurt you is through a 10-year-old girl? That won't happen, he said fiercely. I would never let that happen. You can't promise that, I said. Not absolutely. And I won't risk her, Riker. I can't. She's everything to me. She's the reason I do any of this. The reason I've made every choice I've made since she was born. And I won't put her in danger, even for this. Even for you. The words hung between us, brutal and honest. What about you? He asked quietly. What about the danger to you? I'm an adult. I made the choice to be here. I knew the risks, even if I didn't fully understand them at first. But Piper didn't choose this. She's just a child who was kind to a stranger in the rain. She's more than that, Riker said. She's become part of my mother's life. Part of my life. And if you're telling me she can't come here anymore, that I can't see her anymore... I'm not saying never, I interrupted. I'm saying not until this threat is completely eliminated. Not until you can guarantee, truly guarantee, that nobody sees her as leverage. And maybe that means never. Maybe your world is too dangerous for someone as innocent and good as Piper. Maybe I've been naive to think we could exist in it safely. Are you leaving? The question was raw, vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from him. Are you telling me you're taking this position and walking away? I thought about Vivian's face that morning, sedated and peaceful but with tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. About the way she'd held my hand last week and said, "Mi siento al sicuro con te." I feel safe with you. About the life I'd built here, the stability I'd found, the terrifying, impossible thing growing between Riker and me. No, I said. I'm not leaving. But I'm drawing a line. Piper doesn't come here until this is over. Until you can look me in the eye and tell me that bringing her into this building, into your life, won't put a target on her back. And what about you? He asked again. What about the target on your back? I'll take that risk, I said. Because Vivian needs me. Because you... I stopped, not quite ready to say what I was feeling. Because I what? He stepped closer, and I could see the exhaustion and fear and something deeper in his eyes. Because you need someone who sees you, I said quietly. Who sees past the control and the calculation to the man underneath. Who knows what you're capable of and chooses to stay anyway. Your mother was right. You need someone who sees you, not the money or the power. And God help me. I think I'm that someone. His hand came up to cut my face, gentle despite the violence I knew he was capable of. Brielle. But Piper stays away until this is over, I said firmly. That's my condition. Take it or I walk right now and you never find us again. I'll take it, he said immediately. Whatever you need, whatever makes you feel safe, I'll do it. How long? I asked. How long until the threat is eliminated? Days, he said. Maybe a week. I've sent a message that will echo through every organization in this city. Nobody touches my family. Nobody even thinks about it. By the end of the week, you and Piper will be so protected that people will cross the street rather than look at you wrong. It should have sounded like hyperbole. Instead, it sounded like a promise he'd die keeping. Okay, I said. 1 week. And then we reassess. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I realized I was crying. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry my world touched yours in a way that scared you. I'm sorry I couldn't prevent this. I'm sorry. Stop, I said, covering his hand with mine. Just stop. I knew what I was walking into. Maybe not the specifics, but the general reality. I chose this. I chose you, even knowing it would be complicated and dangerous and impossible. Why? He asked. Why would you choose this? Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not just surviving. I'm living. I'm building something that matters. I'm part of something bigger than just getting through one more day. I paused. And because when I'm with you, I feel seen in a way I've never felt before. Like I'm not just a collection of obligations and fears, but an actual person with value beyond what I can provide for others. He pulled me closer, and I let him, pressing my face against his chest and feeling his heartbeat, fast and hard against my cheek. His arms came around me, holding me like I was something precious he was afraid to break. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be with someone without calculation or strategy. How to let someone in without knowing exactly how it benefits my position. How to care about someone in a way that makes me vulnerable. Neither do I said. I've spent 10 years building walls to keep Piper and me safe. I don't know how to let those walls down. But maybe... I pulled back to look at his face. Maybe we learn together. Maybe we're both terrified and vulnerable and completely out of our depth. But we do it anyway because the alternative is going back to being alone. And I'm so tired of being alone. So am I, he breathed. And then his mouth was on mine, Seti, and I was kissing him back like I'd been waiting my entire life for this moment. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and honest and tasted like relief mixed with terror. His hands tangled in my hair, mine gripped his shoulders, and for a few perfect seconds, nothing existed except this. The connection, the acknowledgement, the terrifying leap into something neither of us knew how to navigate. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I'm choosing you, he said, and Piper, and whatever life we can build together. I'm choosing it over every strategic advantage, every business opportunity, Every calculation that says I should keep people at arm's length. You're more important. Don't make me more important than your safety, I said. Don't make choices that get you killed. Then stay, he said. Stay and give me a reason to come home that's stronger than any threat. Stay and be the anchor that keeps me human when everything else in my world tries to make me a monster. I'm staying, I promised. But Riker? If you ever lie to me about a threat to Piper, if you ever manipulate me or hide something that affects her safety, we're done. Immediately. No second chances. Understood. He kissed me again, softer this time. 1 week. I'll eliminate this threat completely. And then Piper can come back, and we can start building whatever this is supposed to be. Okay, I said. 1 week. He kept his promise. By Friday, the news was reporting on a series of arrests and mysterious deaths in the organized crime community. Vague enough that the public wouldn't connect it to Riker, but specific enough that everyone in his world would understand the message. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the attempted breach, Riker called me into his office. He showed me surveillance footage from multiple sources, security analyses, communication intercepts, everything proving that the threat had been eliminated and that new protective measures were in place. It's safe, he said. For you, for Piper, for my mother. Nobody in this city would dare touch you now. You have my word. I studied the evidence, then looked at his face, at the exhaustion and the determination and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. Okay, I said. I believe you. Piper can come back. That Saturday, we had dinner together, all 4 of us. Vivian, lucid and joyful, presiding over the table like a queen. Piper, telling elaborate stories that made everyone laugh. Riker, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him, his hand finding mine under the table. And me, sitting in the middle of this strange, complicated family we'd accidentally created, feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Safety. Home. After dinner, while Vivian and Piper were looking at old photographs in the living room, Riker pulled me aside. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying, for trusting me with your daughter, for giving me something worth protecting beyond just assets and territory. Thank you, I replied, for keeping your promises, for choosing us, for being someone I can trust even when I'm terrified. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I felt every carefully constructed wall I'd built around my heart crumble completely. Whatever happened next, whatever complications and dangers lay ahead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd finally found something worth the risk. 6 months later, spring had transformed the Brownstones' garden into something close to Piper's imagined drawing. Vivian sat in her wheelchair among the roses. Red ones, like her mother's, that Riker had planted specifically for her. Watching Piper chase butterflies with the unself-conscious joy of a child who felt completely safe. I stood at the kitchen window, watching them, feeling Riker's arms wrap around me from behind. You're thinking too loud, he murmured against my neck. I'm thinking about how different everything is, I said. 6 months ago, I was scrubbing toilets and calculating bus fare. Now I'm standing in a garden watching my daughter play in a space that feels like home. Is it home? He asked. Or does it still feel temporary? I turned in his arms to face him. In the past 6 months, we'd learned each other's rhythms. The way he'd call me at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep, just to hear my voice. The way I'd text him pictures of Piper's latest drawings or Vivian's lucid moments. The way we'd stolen kisses in darkened hallways when his mother was asleep. Both of us learning how to be vulnerable with another person. It feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived, I admitted. Good. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box that made my breath catch. Because I'd like to make it official. He opened the box to reveal a ring. Not a massive diamond designed to show wealth, but a delicate band with a single stone that caught the light and threw rainbows across the kitchen wall. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we've only been together 6 months. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons to wait. But Brielle, I've spent my entire adult life calculating risks and making strategic decisions. And the only decision that's ever felt completely right, completely certain, was choosing you. Choosing this." "Riker, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale. My world is still dangerous. There will always be threats, always be complications. But I'm offering you partnership, protection, a family that chose each other rather than being born into obligation. I'm offering you a man who sees you exactly as you are and loves you because of it, not despite it." My eyes were blurring with tears. "I'm terrified." "So am I," he admitted. "Terrified that you'll say no. Terrified that I'm not enough. That my world is too complicated. That you'll wake up one day and realize you deserve someone simpler. Someone safer." "I don't want simple," I said. "I don't want safe. I want you. I want this strange, complicated family we've built. I want Vivian's stories and Piper's laughter and your late-night phone calls. I want the danger and the protection and the way you look at me like I'm the most important thing in your world." "You are," he said. "You and Piper and my mother, you're everything that matters, everything I protect, everything I'm building toward." "Then yes," I said, and watched his expression transform. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll choose this life, this family, this complicated, dangerous, beautiful thing we've created." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, like he'd somehow known it would. Then he kissed me, deep and thorough, the kind of kiss that made promises about the future we'd build together. "Mom, Mr. Stone," Piper's voice carried from the garden. "Mrs. Stone wants you to come see the butterflies." We broke apart, both smiling, and walked outside together to find Vivian gesturing excitedly at a monarch butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger. "Miracolo," she breathed. "A miracle. Just like you two. Just like my tesoro." She looked at Piper, then at Riker and me, her eyes surprisingly clear. "You know what I see when I look at this family?" "What do you see, Mama?" Riker asked gently. "I see what I prayed for," she said. "Every night since your father died, I pray that you find someone who sees your good heart. Someone who makes you remember you are more than just business and protection. Someone who gives you reason to be gentle." She reached out and took my hand. "And you, Kara, you find someone who keeps you safe, who gives your daughter stability, who makes you remember you deserve to be loved, not just needed." Tears were streaming down my face. "Vivian, this is good," she said firmly. "This is how it should be. Family that chooses each other. Love that comes from kindness, not obligation." She looked at Piper. "And it all starts with one little girl who gives cab fare to a stranger in the rain." Piper moved closer, carefully hugging Vivian. "I'm glad I helped you that night." "I am glad too, Tesoro. So glad." Vivian's eyes drifted shut, her moment of clarity fading, but she was smiling. "So very glad." Later that evening, after Vivian had been settled for the night and Piper was asleep in her room, the room that had become truly hers, filled with books and art supplies and all the things a child needed to feel safe and loved, Riker and I sat in the garden as the sun set. "Are you happy?" he asked. I thought about the question, about my life 6 months ago, the exhaustion, the fear, the constant calculations about money and survival. about how I'd measured my worth in double shifts and rationed groceries, about how I'd believed that happiness was a luxury people like me couldn't afford. And I thought about now. About waking up in a warm bed instead of lying awake worrying about bills. About Piper's cavity being fixed and her new backpack that didn't have fraying handles. About Vivian's lucid moments when she'd tell me stories or teach me Italian phrases. About Riker's late-night confessions and the way he'd learned to be vulnerable. To let someone see past his careful control to the man underneath. Yes, I said. I'm happy. Terrified sometimes, confused often, but fundamentally, deeply happy. Good. He pulled me closer. Because you've given me something I thought I'd never have. A reason to come home that's stronger than obligation. A family that feels like sanctuary instead of duty. A future that looks like something more than just survival and strategy. You've given me that too, I said. For 10 years, I focused only on Piper's needs, on making sure she had enough, even if I didn't, on protecting her from everything, including my own wants and needs. But you made me realize that taking care of myself, allowing myself to be loved and protected, that doesn't make me selfish. It makes me human. And it models something better for her than martyrdom. You're an incredible mother, he said, and an incredible partner. And soon, you'll be my wife. Your wife, I repeated, testing the words. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time, he said. All the time in the world. We sat there as darkness fell, the garden lights casting gentle shadows, the city humming beyond the walls that protected us. And I thought about that rainy November night 6 months ago, when Piper had stopped a taxi for a confused elderly woman and changed the trajectory of our entire lives. I'd been terrified that night. Terrified of the cost, terrified of the sacrifice, terrified that my daughter's kindness would lead us into danger. And it had led us into danger. But it had also led us here, to safety, to stability, to a love I'd never imagined possible, to a family we'd chosen rather than one we'd been born into. I love you, I said, the words easier now than they'd been the first time. I love you, and I love this life we're building, and I love that my daughter's simple act of kindness led us to you. I love you too, Riker replied. And I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret the choice to stay. Making sure Piper knows she's protected and loved. Making sure my mother has the peace and joy she deserves. Making sure this family, our chosen family, has everything it needs to thrive. I know you will, I said. That's why I said yes. Inside the brownstone, through the window, I could see Piper's room glowing with soft light, could see the evidence of the life we'd built here. A life that had started with $50 and a rainy night, and a child brave enough to step into traffic for a stranger. A life that had become something neither Riker nor I could have predicted, but both of us desperately needed. A life that proved that sometimes, the most dangerous choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. And as I sat there in Riker Stone's arms, surrounded by roses and spring air and the distant sound of the city we'd both learned to call home, I thought about that moment 6 months ago when I'd stood in the rain, torn between pride and terror, watching Piper hand over money we couldn't afford to lose. I'd been right to be afraid. The path we'd walked had been dangerous, complicated, full of threats and impossible choices. But I'd also been wrong about what mattered most. Because in the end, Piper's kindness hadn't led us into danger. It had led us home.